Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. My guest today is Mark Quandt. He's Executive Director of the Northeast Regional Food Bank, and we'll be discussing today the food bank as well as hunger in the Capital District. I want to welcome you to the show, Mark.
Thank you, Richard.
This is a very serious topic. Anybody who's been hungry, seriously hungry, not just they didn't eat, since breakfast and it's noon, feels totally different, and I think most people can't understand that. But to start, what brought you to this field? What brought you to try to fight and alleviate hunger?
Well, it's not an exciting story, but in 1983 I was graduating with my master's in social work from SUNY Albany, and I was looking for a job, and at that time the food bank was very, very small, tiny, one staff person, and really there was an ad in the paper that just asked for a food bank manager. My family was in the food business, still is in the food business, so I had some background in food distribution, and I had my master's in social work, so I thought, well, maybe there's a match there that would fit me well. So I applied for the job, and I got the job, and slowly grew into the job itself, and over time stayed there, and the food bank has just grown many, many times since my first involvement with it.
That does fit. Social work is somebody caring for our society, and then the technical, the operations part, which I'm incredibly impressed with what you've done, and I want to talk about that later.
Okay.
Is something that you covered with your experience in the food distribution business.
Right.
It's perfect.
Yeah, it was a good match.
You said it was small in '83.
Yes.
How long has it existed?
Well, the food bank began in 1982, actually, so I started a year after. When I began, there was one staff person. There was the director of the food bank, and I was the second person. They had been able to get a state grant, which allowed for funding to hire a person to actually run the food bank and the warehouse end of the operation. So I was that person.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about how this works? What is the food bank? What do you do? What's your mission?
Sure. Well, the food bank's mission is actually it's a twofold mission. We work to alleviate hunger and at the same time prevent the waste of good food. And it's a very simple concept. And basically what we do is collect large donations of food from the food industry. It's not food that would be right off the shelf, right off the grocery shelf that they would donate, but it's items that are still perfectly good to eat, but they can't be sold. Maybe it's items that are nearing their code date, or it could be just an error in production that a manufacturer has, or just an overproduction. Could be fresh produce that's slightly imperfect, packaging that errors or packaging damages, many, many different reasons that food at the level of the food industry is just thrown out. So instead of that food being thrown out, companies can donate that to the food bank, and then we redistribute that to food pantries and soup kitchens, shelters for the homeless, and many other human service organizations. So that really covers the preventing the waste of good food, but taking that good food and putting it to a good use. And that's really to help alleviate hunger through the work of the food pantries and soup kitchens and other agencies like that.
But that is such a massive undertaking. When I was looking at the website, your website, a couple days ago, in order to try to figure out a few questions, I realized the amount of food that you work with. So that everybody can hear, how much food do you distribute?
Well, we distributed in 2008 about 19.7 million pounds of food. Now, not all of that was donated from the food industry. We also received some federal government commodities that are donated, and we also purchased some food to supplement what we receive in donations, because when you depend on donations, you really are not able to get everything that your member agency's needs, so we supplement with purchases. But in total, we distributed close to 20 million pounds of food last year.
That's I just can't get my mind around what that would be like. How do you do that? How do you what's the operational issues here?
Well, we have a large operation, and it really runs, if you haven't been there, I guess I would start by saying most people, when they come to the food bank for a visit and we take them out in the warehouse, their first reaction is, I had no idea that you were this big. And it's a full-scale warehouse operation. So it's really, we have to run that end of it like any food distributor. We receive the food in, everything is computerized. If it's donated product, a company that wants to donate that, if it's local product, we'll go pick it up and we'll bring it to the food bank. But we're part of a national network called Feeding America. It used to be called America's Second Harvest. And they acquire donations from companies throughout the country, and then they allocate that to food banks throughout the country. So if we get that type of product, the trucking company will call and say, I have a load of whatever it is, juice, whatever it is, and they'll make an appointment, they bring it to our warehouse, we receive it into stock, enter it into the computer, and then once it's entered into the computer, we put it away on shelves that are all labeled and numbered so that they're all sequential, and then agencies can order that product. We have an inventory listing that is available to them, and they can order from that. And it's just like placing an order, like any restaurant would place an order with a food distribution company, and just then the orders are just pulled and provided to the agencies, just like a restaurant would do if they had placed an order with a company.
It just makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's a straight, I wouldn't say it's a simple process, because there's a lot involved in it, and certainly if you try to do it right and do it well and provide good service, there's a lot involved with it. But it's a relatively straightforward process. You receive it in, you keep good track of it, you store it properly, and then it's available for distribution. You pull it, and then you get it out to your member agencies.
So why do all these supermarkets send you food?
Well, it's in many ways, it's in their best interest to do so, because again, we're asking them to donate food which would otherwise be discarded. Still good to eat. They can't send us garbage in a sense. We wouldn't be that, and they don't do that. But it's food that they don't really have a use for. They're not going to sell it. Their options are to throw it out.
And that costs money.
It costs money to throw it out or to donate it. And the reason that the food bank works for them is that it doesn't matter how big or small the donation is. We can handle any size donation and any type of donation. So whether it's non-perishable, whether it's a refrigerated product or a frozen product, and even non-food items, doesn't really matter. It could be a trailer load, could be one pallet, 20 cases. It doesn't matter what size it is. We can handle any size and type of donation, and that the variety is actually very helpful for us so that we can provide that to our member agencies. If the food bank didn't exist, companies would not really be in a position to donate much of that food because the quantities are so large.
How would they do it?
Yeah, they wouldn't. Because they would have to call 20, 30, 40, 50 different agencies to come to their facility to pick up a few cases each, and they're not going to do that. They're not set up to do that. It's too time consuming and it's too laborious to really do that. It's just not going to happen. So really the option without the food bank would be these companies would really have to throw that product out.
Now that's one half of the picture. The other half of the picture is how to make it happen, and that's where you and your staff and your facility comes in. How do you fund that?
How do we fund that? Well, we have a variety of funding sources. I'd like to say that we've learned over the years and have been fortunate to be able to diversify our funding base, so we're not totally dependent on any particular source of revenue for our operation. The core of our funding, not the largest part of it, but kind of the early core of our funding was what we call a handling fee, or shared maintenance fee. When we distribute the donated food we receive, we have a handling fee of 16 cents per pound that we charge. Actually, we give away a lot of it for free, all produce, bread, things like that we give away for free because we have to move it quickly, but 16 cents a pound is a very nominal fee. Nothing costs 16 cents
No,
a pound.
no.
And actually, it costs us much more to receive it, handle it, and distribute it than 16 cents per pound. But it does give us a base of funding.
And when you start out with a 20 million number, it does add up.
It generates revenue for us. But in addition to that, for the federal government commodities we distribute, we do get an administrative fee for handling that. And then we also administer one contract for the state. It's called the Hunger Prevention and Nutrition Assistance Program. It's more pass-through money that comes through the food bank to our member agencies, but there is some administrative money involved with that also. But more and more, really, the core of our funding, moving really close to 50% of our funding comes from fundraising activities. And that involves direct mail campaigns that we do, just contributions. Generous people send us financial support, grants that we apply for from different foundations, mostly local or regional. In addition to that, though, we have a number of different fundraising events that we conduct every year that are very successful, and they generate revenue for us. So really, it's the appeals and the fundraising events and the fundraising appeals, that outreach, that is becoming more and more important to us and really the core of our funding.
You would think that these days, with the economy not doing well, that you would have more people needing food. But then do you also have, I guess that's one question. Well, let's just start with that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if you talk to any food pantry right now, they'll tell you that their numbers are up depending on where the location is. I've heard 20%, I've heard over 200% increase. It's just, anytime you talk to someone who works at a food pantry, they just shake their head and say they've never seen numbers like this. And it's a lot of people who have never really used a food pantry before, people who are in secure jobs, who are recently unemployed, and never, in many cases, these are people who are donors. And now all of a sudden they've fallen on hard times, like so many people in our community are really struggling right now because of the economy, struggling so much. And so there's a lot of new people going to food pantries for help, and a lot of people who have been recipients in the past who are in more and more dire situations and need that help on a more regular basis.
So you get 20 million pounds a year, and the food pantries are having more requests for food. How are we doing? Is it enough?
Well, we are working very hard to bring in more and more food. I would say at the end of last year, one of my biggest concerns is our distribution was very heavy. We were moving food out, which was great, but when I'd walk through the warehouse, the shelves were getting more and more depleted. I'd say right now we've brought in a lot of good food since that time, so we've replaced some of that, but still we need to keep that continuing. We need that food flowing through. So we've tried to be more active. We have very generous food donors that we work with, but we're doing more and more outreach with food companies and trying to identify potential new sources of donated food in addition to that.
And these would be fairly large donors that
Yes.
you're looking for.
Yes. We had the good fortune that I'd say for the last 4 or 5 years, the federal government commodities that we receive, it's called the Emergency Food Assistance Program.
Okay.
Really, it's the price support program for farmers that runs through USDA. The amount of food we've received through that program in the last 4 or 5 years has declined considerably. But just this year, with the new farm bill last year, some additional money was put into the program, and for the first time in years, there's some more food finally flowing through that program, that all goes out to our agencies free of charge. So that's been a big boost, and that really just happened at the end of last year. So that's been a big help. We've really been working hard with our food donors to increase food donations there, and we have a couple of other new initiatives that will probably be happening over the course of the next few months, which we hope will add also to the amount of food we have available.
Now, I know that you also accept donations from anybody in any
Yes.
amounts.
That's true. We do, in terms of food, in addition to financial contributions, which are very, very important to us. We've actually received more food from food drives last year than we ever did.
And what kind of a food drive would that be?
Oh, it could be anything. It really could be, we've had bands do concerts every year. New York State does their Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Food Drive, And so they encourage their state employees to donate food through a food drive, which all gets collected and brought back to the food bank. And that's probably the largest single food drive that we're involved with.
So high schools could even get involved.
Oh, we have a lot of high schools involved, a lot of businesses, a lot of individuals. We have a very high energy supporter in Guilderland who decided to do a neighborhood food drive. And she went around and passed out flyers to her neighborhood, said she'd be by on, I don't know, Friday to pick up whatever food they would leave out, and people would leave food out on their porch, and she'd come through and pick it up. And so we had all different types of food drives happening. Actually, I think we had close to 200 food drives during the holiday season last year, which brought in a lot of food. It's not the core of what we do. It's a small, real percentage of the grand total, but it's all real good food. It's all non-perishable food, usually the core essential foods that food pantries need. So that's become a more important part of our total mix also.
And in terms of monetary donations, how important are those?
Oh, absolutely. Well, we couldn't run our operation.
Right.
As I mentioned, the shared maintenance fees we charge are less than 20% of our revenue. They don't come close to even covering the cost of moving the case out to our member agencies. So it's absolutely critical.
Are people stepping up? Because you said there are a lot of people now who used to give and they can't because now they actually need food.
Right.
Are other people stepping in?
Yes, absolutely. We've been very blessed to have that type of support. I would say sometimes people also can donate. When people run a food drive, we really encourage them to don't just do food, collect financial donations if you can also.
Okay.
To give people who would prefer to donate that way that option, and for people who forget to bring the can of food into work, they can maybe donate $1, $2, $5 and do their part. But yes, to answer your question, people have really stepped up. It was really kind of, I just say, humbling for us. At the end of the year, we had so many people tell us that they knew things were bad and they wanted to do something extra and make sure that they were supporting an organization that was meeting basic human needs. Nothing more basic than food. So we had, I think, a lot of people who were already donors to the food bank increase their contributions, which is incredible, really, when you think in the midst of the struggles and the downturn in the stock market and the increase in prices and everything else. And a lot of new people who donated for the first time, and in some cases very substantial contributions to try to help us through what everybody recognizes is a very difficult time. So we're very, very grateful to the generous people in this area for all they have done for us over the 26 years we've been around and continue to do for us.
And we need to keep it up.
Yes, we do. Yep.
Is there a demographics of hunger? The kind of person that you see? Is it
I would
minority?
say,
Is it
no, not at all. I would say that in the early days of food banking in the early 80s, probably the majority of the people who came for help were, I wouldn't say a majority, but a high percentage were people who were receiving public assistance, some type of government support, not necessarily all the time, but when they were in that situation. That has really changed, and that's not just recent either. I'd say that began to change in the late 80s and certainly through the 90s and into the new century here. More and more it's the working poor, people who are working one job or both spouses are working, or maybe one's working part-time, but they're working at a very low wage and they're just not able to make those dollars stretch. So most people, I think there are some people who are using food pantries on a monthly basis. And I think that is one thing that has changed also, that in the past people might have needed it 2 times a year, 4 times a year, but for a lot of people it's been a more steady need. But for the great majority of people, they're getting help once, twice, 3, 4 times a year, but they run into these very difficult situations where there's just no food in the home. And they have to either go without or they make sure that they take care of themselves. And in many cases, it's the parent saying, I don't really care if I eat, but I have to make sure that my kids have something to eat.
Right. Now you mentioned people are getting once a month, and that made me wonder, and remember another question I wanted to ask you because I didn't know the answer until just yesterday. What's the difference between a food bank, a food pantry and a soup kitchen?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked. I think over the years we've had less of a need to explain that. I think more people understand it. But a food pantry serves individuals directly. People, many of them are based in churches or some are in other organizations like Community Action Program. Salvation Army has a lot of food pantries. People go there for an emergency bag of groceries. Usually the food pantry will give them a 3-day supply of food, enough food to get them through the next 3 days.
So that would be the monthly visit, but they would get maybe 3 days?
Typically it's 3 days. Some a little bit less than that. Some say they do more, but for the most part, the great majority of food pantries are helping people get by for the next 3 days.
Okay.
That's what they supply. And hopefully people get back on their feet, or at least that'll get them, if they're getting food stamps, it'll get them through until they get their food stamps again, whatever the situation is. But that's really what a food pantry does. It serves the individuals directly. The soup kitchen would do the same, although they provide a meal to the person who they're serving. And an emergency shelter is obviously that. It's typically for someone who's homeless, either long-term or short-term, who needs someplace to live until they can get back on their feet and find their own place. We call those emergency feeding programs. They're all
It's almost
serving,
like an emergency room.
yeah,
For health.
Yep. So we call those emergency feeding programs because they're meeting an emergency need. People wouldn't eat if it wasn't for those programs. The food bank is different than a food pantry in that we don't serve individuals directly. We provide food to other organizations like a food pantry, like a soup kitchen, that is helping to feed those people directly.
But I guess the thing that I didn't understand is many of those couldn't operate without the food bank.
Yeah, they're very dependent in many. Some are less dependent, but for the most part, most food pantries really depend pretty heavily on the food they get from the food bank.
And I would
to
think the
provide
more
their service.
successful they are, the more dependent they are.
I think it varies from pantry to pantry. We were involved with a hunger study that was done nationally through Feeding America, the national network of food bank organization, and that was 4 years ago. And we're in the midst of doing a new hunger study. We do it every 4 years. And one of the questions that they asked food pantries at that time, and soup kitchens and shelters, is if the food bank didn't exist, what impact would it have on your organization if the food bank didn't exist? And 94% of those that responded said that that loss of the food bank would have either a devastating or a very significant impact on their operations. So it's almost 100% of the organizations depend on the food bank pretty significantly, in some cases almost exclusively, to meet their need.
I get the picture that without the large amounts of food that the grocers and other government programs provide, you would just be devastated. But without the ongoing extra help that people are providing, there would be a lot of people hungry.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the way things are right now, I wouldn't call this the ideal system of feeding people in need in our community. And I recognize that there are other ways. I mean, if we had a society which justice flourished and adequacy reigned, everybody would have enough to eat through their own means. That doesn't exist right now, and right now we're in a down cycle, so that we're farther and farther away from that ideal than we have been in my many years involved with the food bank. But what food banks do and what food pantries are doing is we're helping to provide an emergency need. And unless people have that food, they're not going to flourish. If kids aren't eating properly, they're not going to perform well in school. They're going to struggle. They're going to fall asleep. They're not going to be able to pay attention. And gnawing in their stomach is going to impact their ability to perform. And it's similar for adults, maybe less severe, but if adults aren't eating properly, they're not going to have the energy to really to work as effectively as they would if they were eating properly. So it's very important that people get nourished. And the younger a person is, the more important role proper nourishment plays. If you have a baby or a young child, if they're not eating properly, they're not developing properly, and you can never overcome that. that can be a lifetime impact, especially if it's an infant. If they're not eating properly, their mind and their mind probably just doesn't develop properly, and they're not going to be able to reach their full potential. So especially with the younger children, you have to make sure that they're being properly nourished.
So then we're really bordering on other social problems.
Absolutely. Yeah, everything is related. And really, hunger is very much related to poverty. Even if it's short-term or temporary poverty, it's very much related to poverty. And people say, well, what's the primary cause of hunger? Well, it's poverty. And so everything is interrelated like that. And if people do not have enough resources to feed themselves, well, they're not going to eat properly, they're not going to learn properly, they're not going to develop properly, and it can have other impacts and other consequences on down the line in their whole life.
It's really troubling. We seem to be developing, at least right now, a stratified society where some people have even more advantages than others, and having the advantage of eating well is a huge advantage. And we're looking today at talking about pesticides and organic foods. Well, if you don't have enough to eat, you can't be too concerned, I would guess, about whether your carrots are organic or not.
True. I think we've always had people who had an abundance, and people in the middle who have plenty, and people are more at the bottom of our economic system who just don't ever have enough on a regular basis. And it's probably more severe right now that we're in such a difficult economy. I don't think that situation is any different probably than it ever has been in our society. Hopefully it's someday that we can move toward what I would call a more just society, where everybody has enough at least for the basic essentials of life, and we're not there yet. But we do live at the same time in a very generous society. I think Americans are famous for being generous, and we certainly feel it at the food bank. I often say that I have one of the best jobs you could ever have, because it feels good to know that you're providing service on the one end. And I think we try to be humble about that at the food bank, that's our mission, and we're just trying to adhere to that and make sure that we're living up to what we're called to do. But there is a good feeling to know that the service we provide is making a difference. But on the other side of it, we just get exposed to just the most generous people and the wonderful acts of kindness on almost a daily basis, whether it's the food pantries that we work with and the volunteers there that just devote so much of their time to providing service, to people who just make generous contributions of their time, of their money, of their resources to help and make sure that the food bank is able to do the work that we do. And so I'm able to witness that, our staff is able to witness that, and that is just a great feeling to know that there's such kindness and generosity that's out there.
Well, let's try to help people channel some of that to you.
Right.
How can they reach you? What's the best way to help?
Well, I'll give you all of our information. It's basically Regional Food Bank is just the short version of our name, the simple version of our name. And our address is 965 Albany Shaker Road, and that's in Latham.
Okay.
And our zip is 12110.
And we'll put that on the screen. And
Great.
would telephone call?
Telephone, yep, 786-3691. And if you wanted to check out our website, it's www.regionalfoodbank.net.
And we'll get all that up there.
Okay, great,
really,
yeah.
Thank you. This is very
thank you, Richard. We appreciate
meaningful.
it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show and that you tune in again next time. In the meantime, send some money to the food bank. Have a great week. Take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.